The moment the girl cried, her tears turned into pearls. Word spread fast, and before long, a string of men came chasing after her for her fortune. But not a single one of them lived to see the next morning. Hidden on her was a deadly curse. Any man who fell for her would feel death close in right away. His heart would burst, and that was the end of him. Then there was Nick, a drifter, who'd spent years roaming the world with nothing to lose, and no one waiting back home. And somehow, he turned out to be the one and only exception in her life. Nick was wandering along the river like he always did when he caught sight of a figure lying by the bank. He went in for a closer look and found a girl passed out cold, her lower half covered in scales, a fishtail. Without a second thought, he took off his jacket, draped it gently over her, and lifted her into his arms. He frantically flagged down cars on the road, desperate to get her to a hospital. The first cab driver took one look at the unconscious girl on the ground and wanted no part of it. The second one gave him the cold shoulder too. Running out of time, Nick bought a cargo tricycle off a stranger and pedaled like crazy toward the hospital. While he was at the front desk filling out paperwork, a doctor spotted the unusual patient and rushed over to check on her. Right at that critical moment, Lula woke up. She saw a strange man touching her, and her survival instinct kicked in. She started singing that ancient, deadly song. Her voice was so pure and beautiful that it completely hypnotized the doctor, a dazed smile spreading across his face. But that bliss didn't last long. A sharp, piercing pain shot through his chest. He tried to stumble into the hospital for help, but he collapsed just a few steps later. His heart stopped beating. Meanwhile, Nick hit a wall at the registration desk. He couldn't produce any ID or paperwork for Lula, so the receptionist coldly turned him away. With nowhere else to turn, and the doctor suddenly dropping dead right in front of him, Nick had no choice but to take Lula back to his place. Their every move was watched by the landlady next door. Nick laid Lula down in the bathtub, the only spot where she could feel even somewhat comfortable. Then he found her some clean clothes, helped her into them, and splashed water on her face, trying to bring her around. When Lula slowly opened her eyes and found herself in a strange room with a strange man, sheer panic flooded her. She broke into that death song again, her eyes blazing with suspicion and killer intent. But Nick didn't react at all to the tune that could make hearts explode. He even mistook it for her trying to be friendly. He tried talking to her in every language he knew, and only when her gaze finally softened did he ask if she was hungry, before she could even answer. He turned around and headed to the kitchen to whip her up something to eat. Lula tried to escape, but the wound on her tail fin left her too weak to move. To get her strength back, she grabbed a little yellow rubber duck by the edge of the tub and bit down hard, only to realize it wasn't food. When Nick came back with dinner, he walked in on that hilariously awkward scene. He noticed the blue blood seeping from her tail fin and asked if it hurt, then went to grab scissors and bandages. When he got close again, Lula instinctively thought he was about to hurt her, and she started singing that deadly song once more. But Nick was completely immune. He even started humming along to the melody. Watching him tend to her wound with such gentleness, Lula finally let her guard down and told him her name was Lula. Nick's eyes lit up with surprise. He'd thought she couldn't speak at all. Just then, Lula broke into a harsh coughing fit, and Nick quickly offered her the food. She pulled away at first, instinctively rejecting anything made for humans. But Nick didn't get frustrated. He just guided her with even more patience. And under the steadiness in his gaze, Lula finally decided to take a bite. She told Nick she had to make it back to the ocean before the third sunrise or she'd die. But Nick was more worried about her injury. He didn't think she'd survive in the water in that condition. He suggested she stay and recover and promised he'd get her home before that third sunrise. Late that night, Nick had a nightmare. He dreamed his heart burst open and he was rushed into surgery. He jolted awake, but he had no idea that this was actually a warning sign of the danger closing in on him. The next morning, Nick asked how her wound was doing, but Lula turned serious and asked him back. "Does your heart not hurt?" Nick said he didn't feel a thing. Maybe it was because she finally truly trusted him. Lula opened up and told him the whole truth about the curse. She said there was no breaking it. Any man who heard her voice would fall in love with her, and then his heart would explode. But Nick told her his heart had been dead for years. He wasn't going to fall for anyone. Lula was terrified he'd end up dying because of her, and she begged him again to take her back to the sea. Nick still brushed it off like it was no big deal, treating it like a joke. After getting Lula settled, Nick left for work. But no sooner was he out the door than the landlady slipped into the room. She assumed Lula was Nick's new girlfriend and kept complimenting her mermaid getup. While they chatted, the landlady told Lula all about Nick's past. He'd had a happy childhood at his parents' flower-bedecked tavern. But after his mother passed, he fell apart. Then came one betrayal and heartbreak after another, each one breaking him a little more. Now the tavern was barely hanging on, and the double hit of loss in work and love had made Nick shut down completely. Lula didn't fully understand human emotions, but she could sense that maybe this man really did need her. After the landlady left, a curious Lula lit the mosquito coil she'd left behind. The moment she tried it, the smoke hit her throat and sent her into a coughing fit. In her panic, she knocked over a bottle of perfume nearby, and the alcohol mixed with the open flames. Suddenly a fire erupted. Nick rushed back home as soon as he got the fire alert, only to find the place nearly reduced to ashes. He searched frantically through the smoke, but Lula wasn't in the bathtub. Finally, he spotted her in a dark corner under the bed, sobbing. The fear and helplessness in her eyes made it impossible for him to feel any anger. He just asked softly if she was hurt, then moved her temporarily to the landlady's bathroom. When he went back alone to clean up the mess, his heart ached. Those handcrafted figurines he'd poured his soul into were now nothing but charred lumps, and his most beloved instrument was completely destroyed. As he tried to step closer, his foot slipped on something hard and round, and in that moment, it hit him. Maybe this was all meant to be. Lula's arrival had burned down everything he once held dear, almost as if it was forcing him to let go of the past and start over. 2 days slipped by fast, and the moment of parting was drawing near. To mark this strange and beautiful encounter, Nick pulled out his little guitar and decided to play a tune with Lula, recording it all on tape. Their voices drifted through the little room, and in that perfectly tender moment, something stirred in Nick's long-frozen heart. He found himself moving closer to her, almost against his will. But just as their lips were about to meet, the click of the recording tape shattered the spell. While Nick was still caught between sweetness and awkwardness, a sharp pain suddenly stabbed through his chest. Lula knew right away that he'd fallen for her, but Nick insisted it wasn't true. The dead doctor's wife, Annie, spotted the blue blood Lula had left at the hospital entrance. She connected it to the strange state her husband had been in before he died, and also to the recent mermaid stories in the news. When she learned that a firefighter who'd helped put out the blaze at Nick's place had also collapsed from cardiac arrest after hearing singing in the smoke, all the pieces clicked. She became convinced that the one responsible for her husband's death was a mermaid with a deadly voice. A fire of revenge began to burn in Annie's chest. That night was the big party at the Flower Tavern. As a farewell gesture, Nick sincerely invited Lula to come along, promising to take her back to the ocean once it was over. The landlady picked out an elegant dress for Lula, trimmed her nails, and did her makeup with care. Under the romantic night sky, a tricycle full of love carried the two of them toward the tavern, a French gentleman at the handlebars, and a delicate mermaid in the back. When they got there, everything around her felt new and exciting, and Nick thoughtfully brought her a wheelchair. The first time Nick's father laid eyes on Lula, he felt an unexplainable sense of approval, and happily started arranging a little ceremony to mark their bond. As ribbons fluttered down around them, something deep inside Lula awoke, a feeling she'd never known before. She opened up to Nick about her past. Way back at the dawn of time, her people had been hunted by humans for their beautiful tales and the pearls from their tears. Her own mother had been killed by human hands. As the only survivor, she'd had to learn to protect herself with her song, luring in greedy sailors and dragging them down to the bottom of the sea. She felt so relieved that Nick had never been affected by her voice. Then a beautiful melody started playing, and Nick swept Lula into his arms and onto the dance floor. Under the dazzling lights, they moved together in a tender embrace, their hearts slowly drawing closer. But as always, the good times didn't last. Nick carried Lula out of the tavern and loaded her back onto the tricycle. Beneath the glowing lights of the Eiffel Tower, they exchanged a smile. No words needed, their feelings clear as day. Then he took her to the aquarium, and she couldn't wait to slip off her clothes and glide into the blue water that felt like home. From the edge, Nick was completely mesmerized by the sight, and without a second thought, he dove right in after her. They played in the water like two fish swimming side by side. But then a tearing pain split through Nick's chest, and he clutched at his heart, desperate to get out. Just as he was about to drown, Lula didn't hesitate. She pressed her lips to his and breathed life back into him, then pushed him up to the surface. The morning of the third day arrived right on time. Even though every part of him ached with reluctance, Nick brought Lula back to the Seine, where they'd first met, but at the very last moment, he begged her to stay. Tears welled in Lula's eyes, but she pressed her lips together and couldn't give him the answer he wanted. She knew the price of staying was one she couldn't afford to pay. But Nick wouldn't give up. He decided to give her one final surprise, a parting gift for a love that could never be. He took her back to that warm little home and played a dreamy animation he'd made just for her. In the glowing projection, Nick pulled a giant fish to the left. But then the scene shifted, and the fish swam joyfully back toward him. It was a sign that their love was full of unknowns and challenges. Lula could feel every frame of that animation carrying their emotions, and tears shimmered in her eyes as hope bloomed in her heart. a vision of a future together. But that beauty was as fragile as a bubble, and fear crashed over her. She was terrified that her very existence would push Nick into the abyss. So she held back her tears and told him a lie. She said she wanted a real fish, not just one made of paper and light. Nick took it at face value and dashed out the door to find one. The moment he was gone, Lula couldn't hold it in anymore. Her tears fell like pearls, clinking softly as they hit the floor. She knew it was time to go. When Nick came back proudly carrying a big fish, he found Lula gone and Annie there instead. Gathering evidence, rage boiled over inside him, and he demanded to know where Lula was. But Annie coldly warned him that he was under Lula's spell. If he didn't snap out of it, he'd end up just like her husband. Overwhelmed with emotion, Nick's heart seized again, and he collapsed on the spot. What had happened was this. After Nick left, Lula had asked the landlady to take her away, but Annie intercepted them on the way. Annie cruelly drew Lula's blood, hoping to use it to make an antidote. When Lula woke up, her first thought was to beg Annie to save Nick, but Annie was too blinded by hatred to listen. Just in time, the quick-thinking landlady disguised herself as a health inspector, lured Annie away, and snuck into the hospital to wake Nick up. Nick and the landlady raced to the lab together, rescued the weakened Lula, and placed her in a bathtub fixed to the back of the tricycle. Then they sped toward the coast because time was running out. The third sunrise was coming, and with it, Lula's life would vanish forever. Lula was barely hanging on in that tub, and Nick's heart ached like a knife twisting inside him. After a long, rough night on the road, they finally reached the ocean at dawn. Nick carried Lula into the cold water, step by step, and just as the waves were about to swallow them both, he let go of every fear and chain holding him back, even the threat of death itself, and held his beloved tight. Their kiss burned with such passion, as if they were trying to carve that love forever into the fabric of time. When he finally made himself let her go, Lula slipped into the deep blue like a spirit of the sea, vanishing beneath the waves. The moment she was gone, the biting pain drained every ounce of strength from Nick, and he passed out in the water. Annie, who had followed them there, found him collapsed on the shore. Just as she hesitated over whether to help, Nick's face suddenly blurred and turned into her husband's. In that instant, it hit her. Her husband hadn't died from hatred, but from a love too great to bear. The flame of revenge in her heart died out, replaced by a complex, aching pity. She immediately started CPR on Nick, and with her relentless effort, he finally came to. But after that soul-crushing goodbye, Nick felt like a piece of his heart was gone forever, an emptiness that reminded him of Lula with every breath. He finally understood that what he felt for her had surpassed life and death. So he used the pearl tears she'd left behind to buy a massive ship, raised anchor, and set sail across the vast ocean in search of his lost love. He held on to the belief that somewhere out there, in some corner of the world, Lula was waiting for him. This movie felt like an impossible fairy tale for grown-ups. But when you get right down to it, love often works exactly like a fairy tale. It hands us moments of pure beauty and ecstasy, but it also promises heartbreak and pain that we can't avoid. It's like how you can't hold on to your youth and fully understand it at the same time. Some beautiful things are simply destined to become memories. Nick's world had been stagnant and dead. The wounds of his past had made him armor up his heart. He lived inside a safe little bubble built of figurines and instruments, refusing to connect with anything new. Then Lula crashed into his life like a blast. She burned down his house and destroyed everything he'd clung to. But she also tore through his cocoon like a blinding light, and woke up a heart that had already exploded too many times to feel anything. And in that awakening, he learned to ache again and to love again.